Oi oi, it's your boy, the Adam Fuggit of crotch chopping and asking you to sug it, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you following UFC 318. Not as bad as it looked. I think most of us were reasonably sceptical because it was a bunch of unks on the main card. Michael Johnson, Patricio Pitbull, Daniel Rodriguez, Paulo Costa, all arguably washed. However, all of them won, which was pretty hysterical, to be honest. And they weren't bad fights either. And then the prelims, to be fair, the prelims were a bunch of massive favourites in execution matchups, scoring lopsided stoppages. But then the main card also had a lot of heavy favourites, and they lost. So, karma maybe? Or God laughing. One or the other. Main event is the one that I'm going to wax lyrical about, because in my preview, I was like, that's the good fight on this card, but I also can't say much about it because I've talked about it so much since the second fight. I feel like I've talked about these guys more than anyone else in the sport. I was having a chat with a friend over the weekend, and I was joking about like how bad the state of MMA is generally because they asked how work's going. And I sort of came round to it because I was like, oh, actually, in about 5 years, maybe less, Holloway, Poirier, Gaethje, Oliveira, Makhachev, probably all going to be retired. And I'm going to be looking back going, damn, we had it really good. And this was the start of it with Dustin Poirier. Bowing out very gracefully. Wasn't quite the perfect retirement because he didn't win, but you can't plan for that stuff. The stuff that they could plan for, they actually got it right this time. MMA and the UFC especially is a very strange place for retirements because they'll do a massive video package, especially for Michelle Waterson, who, I mean, she's not really like that well liked as a fighter. And then they'll let Stipe Miocic go out for his last fight, and they'll remember to do a video package next week on the card that's going on at 7 a.m. because it's in Shanghai. The one that they really did execute perfectly was Robbie Lawler. And when it comes off, it's just brilliant. And to be fair, not all of that's on them because it's very hard to do these graceful exits in a sport where if you're retiring, it's probably because you started getting laid out. You know, you're losing a step and you're losing fights, and there's a great chance that you get smoked, especially if you've got 1 foot out the door. That is the reason that fighters don't announce their retirement until they decide it in the cage, and they often end up going back on it, is because if you decide you're retiring before your final fight, you can end up sort of losing focus on that. Not accusing Dustin Poirier of that, but I have heard it said many times by people training for their last fight with 1 foot out the door. Now, the fight. The analysis that I did give was that I wanted Max Holloway to get to the body earlier and more often because that was effective against Dustin Poirier. Stop trying to blow his head off because Dustin Poirier's guard is all very focused on his head. You know, the low lead arm, I think, distracts people from the fact that everything is set up to counter headshots. The high lead shoulder, he often raises the lead elbow. If you want to learn more about this stuff, go read the article, Dustin Poirier Advanced Striking 2.0. Google it. It'll take you to the article on my website, fightprimer.com. It's open for everyone. You can go have a read. But his shoulder roll is especially adapted for MMA, where everyone is throwing head punches and you have very small gloves. So his hand is often up really high with his wrist in front of his sort of temple area, hand on top of the head. So it's all centered around taking punches on either the shoulder, the elbow, the forearm, or the top of the head, which is not really going to hurt you very much, probably. Compared to other punches, and then returning with counters. And that's what makes him so dangerous on the inside. If you watch his fights with Eddie Alvarez, Dan Hooker, and even the first Holloway fight, he's catching them with counter right hooks and things as they're standing almost on top of him. So what I wanted to see from Max was a focus on a variety of targets, particularly the ones that are open, so the body and the legs, and variety of weapons, because he's got a great kicking game, but he gets into these fights where he's like, I'm a boxer. And it's like, why aren't you using, I'm going to be John Danaher, 50% of the human body? So it was a great joy to see him come out and needling the lead leg with sort of like side kicks and lead leg stomping kicks. But the right body kick was a huge part of this fight. He was throwing it just at Dustin because when Dustin's rear hand was up high, when you're in an open stance matchup, Southpaw versus Orthodox, the only thing protecting that backside is your power hand. Your right hand if you're Orthodox and your left hand if you're Southpaw. So if you throw kicks into that, you can really hurt it. And if they ever start throwing punches while you're kicking, you've got a great chance of slotting the leg underneath and hitting the ribs, which is what Holloway was doing. He was even throwing it as a counter. He'd hand fight with Poirier, and Poirier would do a big lunge to throw an overhand left, and he'd slam the right shin and underneath the arm onto the ribs. It's a great time to kick because it's the time that you know that their rib cage is going to be open, but it's tricky to time. And if you see someone do it well, it's like the moment the opponent's elbow opens up, you're not kicking, the leg's just appearing where the opening is. If you want a historical example in MMA, Donald Cerrone hit a few on Eddie Alvarez, but that was a switch kick or just a step-up left kick to the body because they were both orthodox. So the kicks were playing a big role, and then the right straight to the body, which he was scoring with in the first fight, but he just went into overdrive with it in this one. And what I really liked in this fight was that he was throwing his hands up and down the body and head, and you could see him throw 4 shots, but maybe the second punch would actually have something on it, and he'd be digging to the body and then coming up with a 1-2 to the head. And the other thing was that he was throwing power shots into jabs, which is a really powerful weapon against people who want to block and cover up and counter, because or people who want to cover up and then drop their hands afterwards and take a break, because you throw the power punch and people think they're trained to think that that's the last thing in the combination. Whereas if you lead with the power punch, let them catch it on their gloves and then throw a jab afterwards. The jab is also longer than all your power punches. So even if they're retreating, you can normally catch them on the end of it. Great example of this in boxing was Sergey Kovalev, and people, boxing commentators and writers would be like, he drops people with jabs. How powerful is he? It's unbelievable. And then you watch his fights, and he's throwing a right straight at their gloves or an overhand at their gloves to make them catch it. And then he's stepping through, his shoulders are completely turned to face them. And then he's stepping through with this jab that's actually just like a left straight. It's a left cross. And he blasts through their head. But using the jab after power punch is a great way to just throw people off, even if you're not using it as a power punch. Skarbowski in Muay Thai, but Willie Pep in boxing had great success with a big loopy right uppercut that like brushes the front of the opponent's forearms, and then you just follow it with a jab, which is significantly longer. So they're covering up, and then they go to come back, and you just poke them in the face with the jab. Also, it keeps people on defense. If you throw power punches and then you throw a jab afterwards, or even a jab and then another jab, you keep them, especially if they're the kind of guy to cover up and try and counter, you keep them covering, and you get a chance at a second combination to try and overwhelm them. That was all great. Max knocked him down in the first round with a sort of slap into a right straight. Again, that's a perfect example of not wasting punches, punching elbows and the top of the head. You remember from the first fight, he goes back to his corner and he goes, he's blocking weird. Which is because, there's so many shots in that fight of Max punching him as hard as he can in the top of the head, which is a great way to break your hands. Or catching elbows on the way in, because Dustin's always pointing that lead elbow at you. So poke, slap, poke, real punch. That was working really well for him. Something that Igor Vovchanchin used to do in... if you're new here, by the way, and you're just tuning in because it's a big fight recently, go look up some of the fighters I talk about. But Igor Vovchanchin was a heavyweight from the bare knuckle days of MMA and no holds barred. And the difference between his fights when he was in gloves and when he was in bare knuckle, and this was proper bare knuckle, I don't think he even wrapped his hands for a lot of his fights, he would throw a big looping hook with almost a straight arm in gloves. But in bare knuckle, he'd throw a big slap and then he'd poke in a little right straight, and that would be with a fist right on the chin. He'd feel where you were with the big slap and then punch down the center, or slap your guard and punch down the inside. Which is what Max did in this little instance where he knocked down Poirier. Poirier came back and dropped him in the second round, and I think the rest of the second round kind of went to hell in a handbasket for Max, because he stopped kicking and he stopped doing all the things that he was supposed to do, and he went back to his corner and they said, why are you moving backwards on a straight line? Because he'd been getting away from the Poirier shift that entire time. The Poirier shift is Dustin Poirier is southpaw, but he's right-handed. Something DC found out this week and then repeated 90 times on the broadcast because he does no research at all. But Poirier has always done this thing I call it the Poirier shift, but it would be probably his lasting impact on the sport, this little move. He throws his left straight as a southpaw. He steps through into orthodox and doubles up with his left hand. So he goes left straight, step, left jab. And then he throws his right hand as a power punch from orthodox stance. And he added a new wrinkle to it here, because he's normally cross jab overhand. But this time he went left straight, and then he stepped through and he dropped his left hand down and he brought it up with a left uppercut, lifted Max's head and hit him with the overhand on the temple. It was gorgeous. It's something that I've been really studying recently. The short left uppercut on the inside with the fist vertical, so thumb pointing back towards you, like you're saying, this guy. You don't even turn your fist for the uppercut because it slips between gloves and forearms easier. So George Foreman was doing this all the time as an old man. And Azuma Nelson is another great one who does it. And actually, in fact, Junto Nakatani was doing it a couple of weeks ago in his last fight. Works really well in boxing gloves. But jab, uppercut off the same hand, I love. And then he caught him on the temple with the right hand. Couldn't have planned for such a lovely connection and a knockdown, but clearly doing something different because he normally goes left straight, jab, whatever. He went left straight, uppercut, and lead-handed uppercut, which I love. So the rest of that round was bad for Max. He went back to his corner and they scolded him, as they should have done. And he came out in the third round, and he took a bit of the third round off and fought on the back foot. And what was really cool was that when Poirier started shifting in again to do his left straight, left jab, overhand, Max showed a variety of ways to deal with it. It was like he was cycling through his defenses. So there were a couple where he ducked under and pivoted off. There was one where he countered it with the right kick to the body and then ran away. And then there was a lovely one where he backed up on a straight line, like he's not supposed to do. But he backed up one step and then he changed level, he dropped down and threw the overhand as a counter. And that one move is so powerful, especially if you've got opponents who want to work their hands and throw volume. That's the way that Juan Manuel Marquez knocked out Manny Pacquiao. You know, Manny Pacquiao throws 4 punches at a time. Marquez is falling behind on the cards, and he steps back and then he drops and throws the overhand, almost not looking. He's turning his body so far through, and he slumped Pacquiao on his face and won. I think that was a fourth fight after he'd lost the first 3, wasn't it? In keeping with the theme of Max Holloway finally getting one on the scoreboard in 2 trilogies. But then if he was bothered about that, he could ask to fight Jose Aldo again. And then he'd already have 2 more wins in trilogies counted. But that retreat, drop, and overhand, BJ Penn knocked down Diego Sanchez in the first round of their fight, and now they've both gone crazy. And Dricus du Plessis got dropped by Brad Tavares, of all people. Brad Tavares, a terrible finisher, not much of a hitter, but he ran du Plessis right onto it and smashed him in the nose. I think it was after that fight that he got the nose surgery that gave him 100% oxygen usage or whatever he's claiming. Oh, it was cool to see Dustin jump the gilly too, and he used Max put his back to the mat, which a couple of guys have done. You know, Dustin Poirier, he is actually threatening people with the guillotine. It's not like he's just grabbing their head and squeezing. So Max rolled with his back to the floor. Poirier came up and tried to punch through a Darce, which would have been very cool. I think he's got a couple of Darces on his record, hasn't he? He danced Jonathan Brookins back in 2012, bloody hell. Oh, and Pablo Garza as well. It's crazy, the Darce used to be rare back when Poirier was hitting it, and now it's, I don't know, what is it, like 6th or 7th in top submissions you'll see? In MMA, that is. Much better suited for MMA than grappling because it punishes people for wrestling into you rather than laying on their back and just sort of playing guard. So the rounds progressed, and really what carried Max through was that beautiful body kick, needling the lead leg. Some nice hand fighting with Poirier. He did we talked last week a couple of weeks ago when Beneil Dariush came back and fought Moicano. I mentioned in my article about that, which is on the Patreon for the boys. His jab is really surprisingly good because he does this thing where he's a southpaw. So he meets a lot of orthodox fighters and their lead hands get in the way of each other. So he taps the lead hand once, twice, 3 times, and then he changes levels and drops his lead shoulder inside of theirs and then jabs them up the middle. And Holloway faked doing that and then stepped around the side and jabbed him from the side and hit him with the right hand as well. It was gorgeous. That was like round 3. I'll make a gif of that because it was lovely. And really this performance just sums up the Max Holloway brilliance because I think people are saying like, oh, he's evolved and stuff. You know, they're both, even though we see them as like old men on the way out, they're both coming off some of the best performances of their career. You know, Dustin against Makhachev was far better than he ever should have been. I was totally dumbfounded by it. And Holloway against Ilia Topuria, he looked fantastic. There was a whole debate raging on Twitter because someone was saying, Josh Emmett actually went the distance with Ilia Topuria, thereby having the best performance against him. It's like, no, he didn't. That's like saying Joshua Clottey had the best performance against Manny Pacquiao because he put his earmuffs on with the gloves and then absorbed 400, 500 punches and didn't throw anything back. But he made it the distance, so he did better than like Miguel Cotto or any of the fighters who actually fought Pacquiao. But yeah, Max Holloway had a really good showing, I thought, against Ilia Topuria and asked a lot of interesting questions of him. And that's the thing with Max, because I'm always saying he's got a little bit of everything. He's so talented on the feet and he's so adaptable. I think this one flies under the radar, but I say it every time. He fought 3 years of his career in the UFC southpaw because he wanted to. He was like, I want to learn to fight southpaw, but I've already made it to the UFC at age like 21. So he comes into this fight with Clay Collard in 2014, southpaw, and he stays southpaw until he fights Anthony Pettis in 2016, where he sort of switches. And then he goes back to orthodox for Aldo and gives him a boxing lesson. So he's never been afraid to try things. I think his losses or fights where I see him and I go, he could have won that if he fought differently. Those are the frustrating ones, because a lot of the time when you see a fighter lose a fight, it's because they have their style and their style was never going to be able to. It was just going to have a horrible matchup with the opponent. I said on the Boycast that when I watch Max Holloway, when I watch most fighters banging a square peg into a round hole, it's because they don't have any other pegs. They've only got the game that they're good at. Whereas when you see Max Holloway trying to bang a square peg into a round hole, the round peg is sitting on the floor next to him and he's ignoring it. So there's lots of fights like the Volkanovski fights where I'm like, why didn't he go southpaw in that fight sooner? Or why didn't he use his kicking game? Or, and there's other fights where he'll come out, have the wrong idea and change. And those are really impressive. But it makes him very hard to read in matchups, because when you're thinking about a matchup between two people and they're both who they are, they're just sort of stuck in the mold of what they do, they're very honest fighters, you can go like, yeah, well, this normally matches up badly with that, and he does this and he does that. Whereas with Max Holloway, it's like, well, if he turns up trying to do back kicks all the time, but if he doesn't want to do that and he decides to box, or if he goes southpaw for the whole fight, there's all these variables that you don't have to consider in other matchups. But then the other thing is that, like, being so durable for Max and having such a great gas tank, it also opens him up to try things. So, like, in this fight, he threw maybe a half a dozen back kicks, and he missed most of them. For about 3 rounds, every time he missed, he ended up badly out of position. But then in like the 4th round, he hit Dustin right in the neck as he was leaning in, and that could have been another Gaethje smash in the face, or he did it to Bermudez back in 2013. Like, he's been doing that for years, catching guys leaning with the back kick to the head, which is very rare. So Max got the win. He did the point down thing, and Poirier was like, "Let's go." he rattled him. Poirier landed a good counter, but man, the hand speed Max has in the 25th minute of a fight is unbelievable. And I think the last couple of fights that he's done it in has made him realize, well, not the Topuria one, obviously, but it has made him realize that he's actually got a bit more pop now. Certainly at lightweight, he looks like he's got a lot more pop, because he was taking the best punches from Gaethje, who has some of the hardest punches in the division, and he was wobbling him, in these rapid exchanges where it looks like he's just throwing sort of little punches to get there faster. So yeah, he rattled Dustin, and Dustin grabbed a hold, and he joked about that in the post-fight press conference. But Max got the win, keeps the BMF belt, ? Don't care. If you care about that stuff, I'm sorry, you're a child. Unless you are a child, in which case, stop caring about that stuff and grow up. But very classy of Max. He immediately goes, this is about Poirier. Go talk to him, to DC. And Poirier gets a lovely walkout. They showed the full 5 minutes of him walking out of the cage and being applauded. And they just really, stuck the landing on this one, as they say. And there's lots of lovely heartwarming footage of Rush, Max Holloway's son, meeting Dustin Poirier, and people are showing the clip of when they met after the second fight. That feels like not that long ago, and then you realise that Rush has grown from like a 6-year-old into a 13-year-old or whatever, and that makes you feel old yourself. But I think this is a really interesting trilogy, because a lot of the time a trilogy happens because guys meet at the top. See you at the top. And it happens because like there was a controversial fight and then they have to have a second one, or in boxing it happens a lot because any time that someone successful and famous and who has a belt loses, they already have it written in the contract that they've got a rematch clause. If you pull an upset in boxing, you have to do it twice. That's the rules. But it means that a lot of trilogies happen as sort of a pause in people's careers. So a great example in MMA would be Brandon Moreno versus Davison Figueiredo, or Cain Velasquez versus Junior Dos Santos. Like two of those guys in those trilogies, they basically only fought each other for a few years, which is crazy. Riddick Bowe versus Evander Holyfield's a great example in boxing, where they basically beat the piss out of each other while the rest of the heavyweight division caught up, and then they sort of like washed each other out just in these damaging fights. But with Poirier versus Holloway, Poirier had a fight in WEC and then moved over to the UFC. Max Holloway arrived in the UFC at like 2021, can't remember what it was, but he was the youngest fighter on the roster. He arrives in February 2012. His first fight is against Dustin Poirier. And he loses it due to like bum rushing Dustin Poirier and getting thrown on his head and triangle armbarred. Second fight was 7 years later in 2019. Third fight was 6 years later in 2025. So it's very rare to have a trilogy that has the two guys at various points. And you can see like how they're growing or regressing and how they're interacting with each other, knowing each other's styles. Which is tricky because like the first fight to the second fight, they were completely different fighters. The second fight to this fight, I think you're looking at largely the same people, but doing different things. Dustin Poirier learned to box between fight 1 and fight 2. Max Holloway learned to fight southpaw and then switched back between fight 1 and fight 2. So a fascinating trilogy that I don't think will ever repeat something like that. If we do, it's going to be by complete accident. Obviously, you can't plan that. And I just want to say how lucky I feel to have covered the sport through the era of both Max Holloway and Dustin Poirier. So the rest of this card, Paulo Costa beating Roman Kopylov was crazy. But then I was watching it and I'm going, oh yeah, he's fighting another southpaw. Paulo Costa has the strangest thing. He's like Chris Weidman. He unlocks like 300% damage buff against southpaws, partly because Paulo Costa loves throwing a right round kick to the body. And if you throw that against orthodox fighters, as he did against Izzy, they will probably turn and step away, take it on their back and catch it, and then punch you in the face. As you remember, I think Izzy dropped him like 3 times off court kicks. But if you do it against southpaws, it tends to be pounding into their rear arm and when they open up their body. So when he was coming up, when he was hot shit and we were all excited for him, I think Gareth McClellan, Bang Bose, Johnny Hendricks, Yoel Romero, all southpaws. Yoel Romero switches a bit. The one that he looked crap in was Uriah Hall, who's orthodox, and jabbed the shit out of him. He lost to Vettori after taking a year off and not at all taking things seriously, and Vettori is a southpaw, but then he came back against Luke Rockhold, southpaw, won. Lost to Robert Whittaker and Sean Strickland, who are both good fighters, but also orthodox. Fights Roman Kopylov, immediately starts kicking him in the body on the right side. And then he was landing a beautiful right straight, slipping to his left. Over and over again. And he's a strange guy because he doesn't finish a lot of people, and he doesn't put people out outright with punches. He seems like one of those, not power punches, but like a strong puncher, where everyone who faces him goes, oh, that's not pleasant, I don't like that, and sort of shells up. Or at least if he gets going, that seems to be the case. Really loved his fake right hand or fake right kick, where he slides up while faking it and then hammers the body with the left hook. Gorgeous stuff. Oh, and I forgot to mention in Holloway versus Poirier, Max Holloway, new wrinkle, ankle kicks. This is something I was talking about in the film room earlier this week, which you can watch on the YouTube channel. I was talking about Yotin, who came out for his last fight. He's the Russia Damnern Stadium champion. He's 33 years old, which is very old for a stadium champion in Muay Thai. But he has this new wrinkle where he was fighting a southpaw in Chila. He's fought him 3 times before, but this time he decided he was going to kick him in the ankle. So he kicks him in the lead leg, China's southpaw, so that you can't calf kick the lead leg like that. Calf kicks are when you're orthodox versus orthodox or southpaw versus southpaw. You throw the rear leg into their lead leg. Or if you're in opposite stances, you have to kick with your lead leg from outside, like Pereira does. But instead, Yotin's faking the kick, getting the guy to lift his leg, and as it comes down, he kicks right at the ankle on the inside of the shin. And Liam Harrison just had him over for a seminar and said he didn't believe that it was legit. And Liam Harrison's a British Muay Thai legend. And he said Yotin showed him, like, did a couple on him. And he's now like, oh, that's the next thing. That's the new thing we're doing, like calf kicks. Yuki Yoza battered another experienced Thai over the weekend with calf kicks. It's funny watching these sort of like newish wrinkles work their way through again. I'm sure people have done them before, but they're just being rediscovered. Anyway, rest of this card, because we're running out of time. Daniel Rodriguez versus Kevin Holland. Wow. I mean, Daniel Rodriguez, I was convinced, I thought he was maybe, except Michael Johnson, I thought he was maybe the most washed on this card. Oh, except Paulo Costa. It was a card of pretty washed-seeming guys. But Daniel Rodriguez lost a fight to Kelvin Gastelum, which no one else in living history has. He's the one in, like, Kelvin Gastelum's 1-7 recent record that keeps him in the UFC. I need to hear Paul Heyman say that. He's the one in 1-7. But it was really interesting because Kevin Holland, I think this just showed how much he relies on tall man defense, because his right hand's always down by his chest. And then he steps so far in to throw it. And Rodriguez hit him with a counter right hook. He was southpaw, so his lead right hook in the first round and wobbled him. And then he hit him with a big left swing from miles away as he stepped in again in the second round and dropped him. This whole fight was just Kevin Holland getting caught with his hands down, or leaning back and not getting far enough away. And Daniel Rodriguez is like 6'1", so it's a bit more of an even match than when Kevin Holland's fighting like 5'8" guys, or Buckley, who's like 5'4". But Rodriguez's reach is still like 72 inches, and Kevin Holland's got like an 80-inch reach. I mean, it just sort of shows how much he relies on leaning back and stuff, or pulling the guy in by the collar tie and elbowing. I mean, he did drop him with some collar tie uppercuts, which was nice. And people were really surprised by that because they didn't look like big uppercuts. But the collar tie uppercut is surprisingly effective, especially because a lot of guys get good at sort of pulling down on the head, on the back of the neck, and then releasing it as they throw the uppercut to sort of whip the head back. If you watch George Foreman or Sandy Sadler doing that in boxing, where it was illegal, but worked really well for them. Pitbull versus Dan Ige. A lot of people trashing Pitbull for this performance, but I mean, he's been fighting 21 years and he just beat a top 15 featherweight pretty convincingly. He got kneed in the head at one point, sort of ducking in, and that stunned him, but the counters were on point. If you watch Dan Ige, he goes in on a straight line, throwing punches and switching, shifting, and Patricio Pitbull timed him with some good right hands, dropped him once. The takedowns were good. Patricio Pitbull's always been very strong. This is the thing. He convinced himself he should go down a weight class when he started declining. He went down to bantamweight and made the cut for the first time. And he just looked awful because he's low output and he's not as fast as actual bantamweights. He's fast like as a featherweight and lightweight. But he's really strong. Like, the crazy thing about his Bellator career is that he just throws around guys who are a head and a half taller than him. But I like Dan Ige's stuff on the ground too. I forgot how much I love Dan Ige as a grappler. As a wrestler, he's sort of mixed results, but when he hits the mat on his back, he's pretty interesting. He hit a nice switch in the first round against Patricio, and they sort of wrestled through the position, but Patricio got him down and past his guard, I think, in the second round. Dan Ige kept the wrist and kept his sort of shin in front of Patricio, and then he bridged off the floor and kicked him into the air to elevate him. And as Patricio was sort of floating around to try and complete the guard pass, he entered the legs and started working the leg locks, which was cool. You know, I always love that stuff. Michael Johnson was the big surprise of the card because he's looked bad for a long time. Like, he got shown up in 2016 by Nate Diaz and he's not looked particularly good since then. And Daniel Zellhuber is a gigantic young talent. You know, incredibly tall, incredibly long, uses his reach very well. Typically, this fight, not at all. He's just throwing kicks from miles away and then somehow still letting Michael Johnson get in and hit him in the body and throw 3 or 4 punches at a time. I liked what Michael Johnson was doing here. I've said for a while, I'd like to make a sort of filthy casuals guide to guys like Michael Johnson who are a very limited bag of tricks, but somehow bring it to lever against lots of different opponents who do lots of different things. But man, Zellhuber, is Dan Ige with Nick Sick as well? That's Extreme Couture, isn't it? But Nick Sick, he has a team of the least adaptable fighters I've ever seen, because he gives good advice in the corner. And you have to imagine with things like this one where he's saying knees up the middle, it's something they must have scouted before the fight, because Michael Johnson constantly throws the left straight to the body or the right jab to the body. And he also, even when he throws to the head, he falls forward. If you look at Michael Johnson's feet when he's punching, he has the Jamal Hill footwork. It's crazy. But he's got something that Michael Bisping used to have too. His back foot always points straight out to the side. It's like he's got a gammy leg and he's sort of dragging it behind him. So when he throws an overhand or whatever, that stays behind him and he just falls forward. So this guy is absolutely available to be kneed in the head by a taller opponent. And when Zellhuber did grab the head at one point when Johnson threw a body jab, grabbed the head, hit him with a knee, that was gorgeous. And we all went, uh-oh, things are going badly for Michael Johnson now. Never went back to it. Kept throwing round kicks from the outside that Johnson took on his forearms and stepped in and countered. Baffling performance by Zellhuber because his corner, Eric Nicksick, is telling him exactly what he needs to do. Unless Eric Nicksick has not been teaching him that in training and has just made it up for the fight. Because you can't teach someone in the heat of the moment, but Daniel Zellhuber did not even attempt to follow the advice. And it's crazy because Nicksick has a team of guys who do that. Chris Curtis, Sean Strickland, I think Ige's there, but just guys who he tells them the right thing to do between rounds and they don't do anything. He was getting angry about Strickland's last performance because he said there's no point him coming to training here. And this is something I was talking about last week with Greg Jackson's place, or Jackson Wink back in the day. I said it was a good place for bodies. If you wanted to turn up and train with as many good fighters in the world as possible, that was a great reason to go there. But that sort of stuff will annoy coaches if you then ignore all the stuff that they try and impart on you. If you go, coach, I don't need the technique part. I just need to bash some of these lads over the head. Sean Strickland turn up and spar every day, but never change. Vinicius Oliveira versus Kyler Phillips. I was so excited for this fight. And then it happened and I was like, oh, that's right. They're both weird. Because they're both really talented, but Kyler Phillips, running around backwards, throwing high kicks off the back foot and stuff. Super athlete by the looks of him. But by round 2, he's already almost dead, just from the way that he fights. It's kind of like Conor McGregor back in the day, where if he has a perfect fight and the opponent doesn't even hit him in round 1, he still might be tired, but in round 2, by the way that he's fighting. And you end up going like, in your ideal fight, in your ideal world, what does a 3-round fight look like for you? Do you just not throw anything in the second round and then come back in the third? Because, Kyler Phillips did nothing in round 3. He just walked backwards and was like, oh, please don't hit me some more. Meanwhile, Vinicius Oliveira, I saw someone say he looks like he was taught to fight in the jungle. He's just prowling after this guy. Even when Phillips was winning and hitting him, he's just walking after him. And whenever Phillips comes to him, he leans back onto his back leg and slaps him with the lead hand and then comes back with the right hand. And it was the same shit every time. And when guys pick up on that, they're going to throw counter combinations ending in high kicks. They're going to go 1-2 high kick. And then he's going to have real trouble. He's either going to get caught or he's going to have to stand up and fight normally in a way that he's not used to. If you want to see a good example of this, Glory, I think it was Vakitov's second fight with Alex Pereira, with old Poatan himself. Because he saw whenever Pereira throws the overhand, he leans really heavy out to his left. So Vakitov kept throwing up right high kicks just every time he saw him leaning. They don't have to be hard kicks because it's a shin bone and the guy's leaning into it. But yeah, Oliveira just walked forwards, swinging. I loved the front kick he was landing, though. That was working from very early on. He's throwing the front kick and it's right on the waistband of the shorts, just above the hip, or just at the hip. And every time he lands it, it folds Phillips in half. Not because he's like, oh my God, I'm so winded and then falling on the floor, but because it's hitting like right at the hip crease. Really good place to teep. Sort of grey area in the rules because it's not the groin, but it is below the belt. So you have to try and make it look quite clean, and you have to rely on the opponent not being like, I've been kicked in the groin, and then taking a point without even looking at the replay. Yes, much craziness in that one. Brendan Allen versus Marvin Vettori. This got fight of the night, and I can see why, but if you've seen one Marvin Vettori fight, you've seen them all, because he's tough enough that like no one can drop him. He might have got dropped in this fight, I can't remember, but no one can finish him. He's really, really tough. But he also doesn't hit hard enough to stop people. He's a really bad finisher. So he's got, like, in his entire UFC career, he's had something like 20 fights and 2 of them have been finishes. Vettori going to the decision is not a bet, it's an investment. Lower returns, but safe. So, yeah, to see him standing there with Brendan Allen, bloodied up, taking lots of punches to the head, giving back punches to the head, and then doing some interesting scrambling, not a surprise to me. He did hit a really nice switch at one point when Brendan Allen took him down and DC went, oh, he didn't even defend it. But he sort of like, as soon as Brendan Allen got on his hips, he laid down, reached between Brendan Allen's legs and hit the switch. It was really crazy. Sad for Vettori because he's been through a recent tragedy, but yeah, decent enough fight. Francisco Prado versus Veretenikov was hilarious. I've only ever seen Prado in like long brawls where he has to sort of tough it out. In the first round of this one, his grappling looked slick as hell. But then as the fight progressed, he was not able to get the fight to the floor more regularly. And every time he hit the clinch, Veretenikov would attempt some kind of judo throw, whether it was he hit him with an osotogari off with his back to the cage, which was crazy. He hit a nice uchimata, the inside thigh throw. And he hit a really cool, is it an ouchi-gaki, where you hook the inside of the calf and like fall over backwards. They do it a lot in Sambo. But yeah, he hit some lovely throws in this one. And then he kept giving up his back by doing crap spinning kicks. So yeah, real Contender Series stuff. Oh, I want to rave about Carly Giudice and even Nicole Cagliari. I was watching that fight and going, damn, this is women's flyweight. This is good. But we'll do the rest of it on the Boycast. And Yuki Yoza fought at the weekend, and Usyk, and there was another guy. I mean, Usyk's 38, but Gary Russell Jr., he came back after 2 years off. He's 38, and he looked sharp as hell. It was just a great weekend for Unks all round. So we'll talk about all that on the Boycast. If you want to get in on the Boycast, support the podcast. Read the Jersey Joe Walcott study. Read the Max Holloway back kick study. Read all the other stuff I do. Sign up to the Patreon. If you haven't checked out the Yotin Film Room on the YouTube, go check that out. And I'll catch you later in the week. I'm your boy, Jack Slack. How the hell is Lucas Brzeski in the UFC with a 1-6 record, having failed the drug test for the Dana White Contender Series fight that he got through to be in the UFC in the first place? Bless.